Or which one?
Okay, hello everybody. My name is Ruth Aguilera. I am the professor. I am the chair of the board of the International Corporate Governance Society. That's is the largest society of corporate governance in the world. And we are joined by the president, Alessandro Zattoni, as well as a couple of board members, Eduardo, Katrina, etc. So I think we have. So this is part about one of our activities of the International Corporate Governance Society. And what we do is we look for people who have written, very good books, very interesting books, because there are a lot of books out there. But we look at very, very good, useful, practical authors, and we invite them to talk to us about their books. So today we have the pleasure to have Patricia Lenkov. And Patricia founded the Agility Executive Search firm in 2008, so right at the crisis of the financial crisis. Today, Patricia has conducted over 500 board and executive searches for corporate clients, as well as some of the world's leading private equity firms and activist investors. In 2018, her firm, Agility Executive Search, was named as one of America's best executive recruiting firms by Forbes, and was included in the Scanlon as well in the New York Power 60 list in 2018 and in 2020 to really show that her firm is a very high quality firm. Previously, Patricia was a member of the board of directors practice as a Spencer Stewart, as well as Hendricks Struggles, the two large firms, and the talent advisory business at Teneo. She is the author of this book that she has. She's the author of this book that she also has in the screen, and we have asked her to just give a very short snap about the book. What's the book about? For us to be able to start a conversation with her. We will take 45 until 5:45 here in Europe, 11:45 in New York and the East Coast, and I will moderate the questions. And those of you who are online can type the questions, or I can take questions from the audience as well. So Patricia, the floor is yours. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Thank you, everybody. It's my pleasure to be here and talk about a subject that's near and dear to my heart. I wrote this book, Time's Up, Why Boards Need to Get Diverse Now, because for many reasons. I've been a recruiter based in New York City, focused on boards and executive searches for 25 years. And I always add that that's since I'm 2 years old, but that's a joke. So I've been focused on boards and recruiting for a very long time and have seen a lot, have been impressed a lot, but also frustrated by some of the lack of change and some of the resistance. So I decided a few years ago to put all my stories and ideas into a very short, very practical, this is not meant to be an academic study of things. It's a very kind of informal look at boards and diversity. And the goal is to educate, but also to get people to really execute on the ideas that I present. At the end of the book, there's lots of steps that companies and individuals can take. So it's meant to be a quick read, but really to try to move the needle forward and to sort of break up some of the misconceptions and hesitations. So I'm writing, I wrote the book as a practitioner. That's what I do all day. I talk to boards, I talk to board candidates. I like to consider myself a governance geek. I think in this crowd, I might not be, but I really, think it's fascinating. It's ever changing. And I'm just going to share a short presentation. We wanted to do this as more of an interactive Q&A. So I'll give you some context and a little bit of sort of a presentation, but then I look forward to talking, more casually, answering questions and trying to give you the benefit of some of the experiences that I've had. So I just wanted to start with some context. I know people come at this subject from various points of view and various levels of experience, but I think it's just important to level set and provide some of the facts. So as you see here, 2020 saw a massive increase in the focus on ethnic and racial diversity. So A lot of people attribute the ethnic focus, right after George Floyd's murder in the United States, there was a big, beginning of focus on ethnicity and racial issues. And as a result, there was a lot of discussion about boards. And so that became a catalyst for a lot of discussion. But, as you see here, underrepresented ethnic and racial groups make up 40% of the US population, but are still just 12.5% of board directors, and that's per ISS. And you can see the number below, racial and ethnic board diversity in the S&P 500 is 21%. So basically it's 12.5% overall, but the larger companies in the S&P 500 are the ones that are further along in this journey and have made the most progress, as you would expect. And then you can see that women board directors in the S&P 500 are now at 30%. I think I read a number this morning that globally, the global average of women on boards per Deloitte is 19.7%. So, if women make up about 50% of the population, one would argue that women should make up approximately 50% of board directors. So we still have some work to do, but we've definitely made progress since I've been doing this, 25 years ago. So I just, as I said before, most of the work really needs to be done in the mid and small cap companies, and there's a whole host of reasons, many of which are very obvious as to why most of the work has been done in big companies. So in my book, one of the chapters is about pressure and quotas. And I don't want to go through all of these somewhat boring laws and initiatives, but I think the net to understand is that quotas started in Norway back in, as you see here, 2005. For better or for worse, it really did make a change in the board landscape and the composition of boards in that country. And after that, many other countries followed suit. Here in the United States, there was a lot of debate, a lot of opposition to the idea of quotas for a whole host of reasons. But the bottom line is that in California, they passed first a soft law, so a comply or explain type of situation. That didn't work too well. So then they turned up the heat a little bit and passed a law that says that all companies that are headquartered in California must have X number of women. And then they more recently added racial and ethnic diversity to that equation. And what's interesting about that is there's a lot of debate. There are some lawsuits. I just read actually that they're settling the first lawsuit about this, which came from the argument was it was about taxpayers' money being used to advance gender diverse and ethnic diversity on boards. So the ruling is still out, but there's a lot of debate, a lot of pushback. But the truth is, at least a dozen other states in the United States have enacted statutes about board diversity. So Washington, Colorado, Pennsylvania, there's a lot going on, a lot of change. And the interesting part about it is, and I'm going to talk about some reasons why boards are not more diverse, is once these quotas get enacted, whether they be in Norway, or in the United States, suddenly they are able to find, directors to go on board. So that, goes against the normal pushback, which is, oh, there's not enough qualified directors for these boards. So when they start measuring and start turning up the heat, suddenly there are people available and people qualified to sit on boards. So this is, this slide is really interesting to me. So I mentioned the myths. Part of what people ask me, and part of what I wrote about in the book is, why aren't we more diverse? Why aren't boards more diverse? We've been talking about this for years. We know, we've moved from, we know that diversity leads to better decision making. It leads to better financial results. So those cases have been proven. The research has been demonstrated. For the most part, it's not 100% unequivocal. I'm talking to academics, so I have to be careful. But generally, the general thinking is that diversity leads to better business results, but yet we're still not there. The numbers are still moving very, glacially, and change is hard to come by in many cases. So there's many myths, but I wanted to just briefly go over these 5 because this is what I hear frequently still, even in 2022, with everything that's been written and all of the changes that have been made. So the first is, of course, there are not enough qualified and diverse directors. This has been the excuse forever. And I remember when Twitter went public, they filed their IPO in 2013. This is a very interesting story, and it created a lot of controversy because the company did not have any women on their slate. And in their defense, the CEO at the time, Dick Costello, said that he simply did not want to check a box for gender diversity. In other words, the implication was that there was not enough qualified women, and therefore, if you put women on his board, it would be checking a box. So that was the belief. At the time, there was an outcry, and lots of people said this is crazy. Articles were published with lots of women who could be qualified for the Twitter board and so on and so forth. And fortunately, that's not the case today, but that is a common refrain. We don't believe that we could find qualified directors, therefore we're going to keep our board not diverse. Another myth, important, is, and this is still believed to be the case, and I'm glad I'm talking to a class of CIOs because this will be interesting to you. There used to be, or there still is, a belief that all boards directors need to be CEOs or CFOs. So every board needs some of these systems thinkers and, of course, financial experts, but the board in its entirety doesn't have to have only CEOs and CFOs. So every board needs technology expertise. And technology expertise, by the way, has changed. The way that's defined used to be bring us, a technology expert, generally, defined. And now there's bring us a data person, bring us a cybersecurity expert. So technology has been really refined. But the idea is that boards do not only have to have CEOs and CFOs. And if you look at who CEOs are, at least of the Fortune 500, there are very few. I mean, there's more women these days, but there are very few ethnic and racially diverse CEOs. So that prevented boards from being, when we were looking only for CEOs, we had a limited pool to take from. So marketing, other skills, international experience, manufacturing, et cetera, boards need to have a whole host of different types of people on them, and that allows us to look in different places and hence add more diversity. We already have one diverse director. This is what I'm told. I've been told for years, and we call this the one and done phenomenon. And so, obviously one is not enough. The quotas specify more than one. And this, bespeaks of a lack of appreciation, really, for the value that diversity brings. So when you hear this, it's, I'm doing this for compliance reasons, rather than realize, the beauty and value that diverse thinking can bring to a company. And then we need to focus on running our business. Of course, this is separate from, board recruitment and board composition is sometimes thought about as separate from running one's business. So this myth ebbs and flows depending on the business environment. So when things are good in the economy, companies feel like they can take a step back and look at composition and diversity and all of this kind of extracurricular stuff, but it really should not be seen as that, but that's the excuse. When things are tough, oh, we can't think about diversity now, we have to just think about running our business. And certainly, in the last few years with COVID, that has definitely been, a real sort of pushback and excuse in some cases. And then the last myth, which is a myth, but still is around these days, is a board seat belongs to a director forever. When I began recruiting board members in 1997, we used to talk about how careful we needed to be when we invited, and it was an invitation, when we invited a director to join a board, because it was a lifetime appointment. They would never be leaving. They, like the Supreme Court in the United States, it was lifetime appointment. So, you know, people who are in governance and recruiting know that this is bad for boards, bad for companies, directors. You know, there still is a belief that if a director steps down too soon, something is wrong with the director, something is wrong with the company. So, you know, we need to sort of rethink and change in order to improve diversity, change about, you know, our ideas about what appropriate tenure is for a board director. And then the last thing I really wanted to share with you, which is important, is to think about, you know, how do directors actually get recruited? And this is kind of mystical in and of itself. People don't really know until they are actually either in the boardroom or being recruited. But in general, for most companies outside of the Fortune 500, when an opening happens on the board, generally it's the board members asking each other, who do we know who might be appropriate to join our board? They might ask their general counsel, corporate secretary, CFO, but it's generally a who do we know question. When that doesn't yield what they need, they may go to their trusted advisors. So who do their bankers know? Who do their lawyers recommend? Who are, you know, their investors might have ideas, but generally, you know, it's a who do we know, who do the people that we know, rather than a proactive, strategic, well-designed process that yields results, which is a case, hopefully, when you engage with a search firm. So right now, 25 to 35% of board searches are filled by professional search firms. So most board searches are filled in the other way. And I use a sports analogy here because I find it interesting. You know, if you pick, let's say, baseball, and you say, okay, the baseball team needs a new pitcher. You know, does the team sit around the locker room and say, who do we know who's a good pitcher? Or do they hire a scout to go around the country, or maybe go around the world, and find the best pitcher that makes sense for the team, that's going to fit the culture of the team and the needs of the team, and so on. So if you use that analogy and apply it to companies, you know, it's hard to understand how they could do anything less than a full-blown, sophisticated, proactive, well-designed, inclusive search. And I put on the bottom, like attracts like, and we know that, you know, diversity of candidates can only come from a diversity of sources of candidates. So that's the end of my preaching.
Thank you very much. That was very very helpful. I really like in the book how it comes out the diversity of thinking. I mean, I think we are even moved beyond diversity in gender. There are so many, so the diversity of thinking comes out very, very nicely. So I would like to ask you the first question, if I may, which is related to your sports analogy. You know, if we're thinking about all the types of possible diversity of thinking, which players are currently corporations looking for? Which kind of expertise in the diversity of thinking? What do they need? So in other words, is every minority group equally sought for the board right now in corporations that they are looking to fill in positions, and that they're doing their skills assessment of how their board looks like? So that's, yeah, what is in need?
So thank you for that. So the first part of the question, what are the qualifications? I talked a little bit about that, but I wanted to just actually, because it's really important to understand, sorry, you know, financial expertise, operational expertise, very important. Other things, though, that boards are looking for that are critical, risk management. So of course, that, you know, used to be that was really financial services, banks and the like would look for risk management, but now every company, and certainly COVID has taught us about the importance of trying to understand and get out ahead of risk. So risk management experience is very important. And, you know, should come as no surprise, but ESG, so environmental and social. So the G, of course, is governance, but the environmental piece, sustainability, this is a hot topic in boards. And, you know, boards are trying to decide whether they need, for example, an ESG committee. Do they need a specific ESG expert, or is it the responsibility of the entire board? So this is being debated now. And then another, you know, I can talk about a lot of different areas of expertise that are needed on boards, but one of the ones that is kind of music to my ears is the fact that boards are now looking at human resource expertise, which is unbelievable that, you know, in the past, this really was not covered except for in the compensation committee. So the compensation committee of the board is where kind of human capital issues were discussed, and they almost, you know, it was sort of not that prominent on the board agenda. So today, as we've learned about employee health and safety through COVID and a dispersed working environment and all of these other things that have changed, boards are now looking at human resource expertise as one of the areas, you know, of need on the board. So,
yeah,
so that should give you some more context.
We have a lot of questions in the chat. Maybe Ruth Shelley, you want to ask your question? She's one of the top scholars, So.
Yeah, sure. Hi. Hello. Thank you very much indeed, Patricia. Really interesting talk. I just wanted to get your sense as an executive search person. How do we get over the inverted commas best fit situation, which certainly in the UK we find happens even when using search firms? So if you get down to the last two candidates and one is inverted commas more diverse and one is sort of more standard, how do you work with the boards at all to remain equally open to the diverse candidate? How do you stop that situation where they just naturally go from two equally qualified candidates, they naturally go for the generally white male?
Yeah, so that's like human nature in play, right? So I think, you know, it's been debated, how do you know, there's a whole controversy now with the Rooney Rule in the United States based on some recent activities in, I think, football coach. But I think some people believe that the best way around that is simply, if you want diversity, to show only diverse candidates, because what happens, to your point, is that sometimes if there is finalists, it's, you know, your natural propensity is to go with the person who feels more similar to you. So some people work around that by only having diverse slates as an example. For me, I believe, you know, it's always qualifications first. And I always tell my clients, you give me your long list, give me 10 qualifications you need. I will find you 10 wonderful qualified people who also happen to be diverse. So I think, you know, I work very closely with my clients to really sort of tease out what they're looking for, both in the hard skills, but also more importantly, maybe, is in the soft skills and the cultural fit and, you know, all of the personality things that you sort of make or break the success of a group, you know, that has to work together. So I think it's, you know, basically the short answer is you have to work closely with your clients, but also sometimes it helps to show, you know, lots of options that are diverse, rather than like the Rooney Rule, which is, you know, for every search you have to show 1 or 2 diverse candidates.
Thank you. We have a question here live from Susanna.
Hello, good morning or good afternoon. It's supposed to be that the age is the moment when you are older, when you are thinking about to be part of a board of directors. So what about the diversity about age?
Good question.
Yeah, age diversity is a really, really good one. And I think we started to talk about age diversity maybe 10 years ago, and to pay attention. And I think the rise of, the importance of technology to all companies meant that we needed to look sometimes at younger people who are more, natives in terms of technology. So age is definitely, every board, I believe, needs to have sort of wisdom, the older part, and experience, but also some younger, different types of thinkers. It was very interesting to me years ago, Starbucks, and this was an eye-opener for me. It was probably 15 years ago. Starbucks at the time put on, she was, I think, 29 at the time. Her name is Clara Shih. She's a technology entrepreneur, and Starbucks put her on the board when she was 29 years old. And at the time, I'm like, this is crazy. What does she know? Like, how could, this young lady be on the board of, Starbucks? I mean, a massive global company. But in hindsight, and now thinking about it, they were really smart. She was a technology expert, a technology native, of a different generation of thinkers, of consumers, and she's still on the board. So obviously it's, worked out well.
Yeah.
I will say one more thing though. I was actually trying to pull up on the other end of the spectrum, part of the reason boards are not more diverse is often pointed to the lack of turnover on boards. We don't have enough seats opening up in any one year to have the change to make boards more diverse. And I pulled numbers. This is not today, it's a couple of weeks ago, but in the United States, there's 26,519 public company board directors. Of those, 11 are 95 years old and above. 53 are 90 and above, and then 878 are 80 and above. So, I mean, my father's 90 and I think he's great, but, I think that maybe at that stage in life, you want to be doing something else, perhaps.
Okay, somebody wrote 90 is the new 30. Thank you. That's all right. Thank you for that question on the age. William Fang, could you tell us where you're joining us from? And if you want to put your face as well, that'd be great.
Sure. Good morning or good afternoon. Sorry, I was just finishing typing the questions. I actually have 3 questions, if you don't mind.
No, that's one.
Yeah.
Pick the best one.
Okay, I try my best to. So as I listened to the presentation, a couple of questions came to my head. First of all, I'm wondering if there are difficulties in diversity, not only for SMEs, but could there be also difficulties for geographically for communities with less diversity? For example, the middle of United States, where so to speak is more white. Secondly, would you think there might be bottlenecks in diversity in the pathway towards senior management, especially in operations, manufacturing, mining, and other sectors or functions, which brought on the diversity difficulty to find diverse board members? Thirdly,
no, that's enough. That's enough. Let's
okay.
do 2. Thank you.
Yeah, I typed them all.
I'm writing them down because I won't remember.
It's impossible to keep up.
So I think
to the other people to ask questions in that way. Thank you, William.
So I'll answer the first question. So in terms of geography and middle of the USA, that's definitely an issue. Big problem prior to COVID was geography and thinking about, it's one of the first questions people will ask is, where does the board meet? How many times a year does it meet? And are there direct flights? This is an important consideration for everybody. And a little silver lining of COVID is that boards, went entirely virtual. Now, the general thinking, in my experience, what my clients tell me is they're going to stay partially virtual indefinitely. So they will go back in person, but they will have some meetings that'll be virtual, which opens up geographically opportunities, far broader and wider. So that's the good news. It allows, let's say if there is communities and parts of the country that don't have enough diversity, people can join the board from almost anywhere. And that's really good for us who are always looking, for new ideas and new people. The fact that, if you don't have to travel, it takes away, a lot of the stress and the challenge and the limitations. And then the second question was about manufacturing and, I think diversity in those industries, if I'm not mistaken. I just wrote pathways into senior management. I think what's really important in my book, I talk about this, you need to think about diversity from the top down. And I always say a fish rots from the head. So you need to have diversity at the top of the organization, but you also need to think about it from the bottom up. We need to make sure we're filling the pipeline and we have sufficient people sort of rising up in the organization. So I think, there needs to be thoughtfulness as to how do you, and this is why we talk about diversity and inclusion, because it's one thing to recruit, at the early stages of, companies, let's say, going to recruit at college, and their big focus on recruiting diverse individuals. But what's been shown is that if there's not the proper inclusion, mechanisms, then a lot of them leave. So I think it's really important to think about what organizations are doing in terms of recruitment, but also in terms of maintaining diverse talent and, access to opportunities once the talent is there. So I don't know if that answers the question. I hope it did.
I actually have a follow-up question to that, Patricia. So Yulia in the chat talked about how, first of all, thank you for a very insightful presentation here. Her question was about your perspective on how boards should manage that diversity. Any advice for how board members can get the most out of their diverse members in terms of actually making sure that they feel included and have an equitable say in the boardroom discussions?
Yeah, so it actually brings up kind of a nuance in the diversity question debate. So a couple of things. So one is that even though we have improved diversity in the boardroom, we still don't have enough diversity in the leadership in the boardroom. So there's not enough chairs or heads of committees who are diverse yet. So that's part of, improving the managing of the diversity, is to have more leadership. And it's been shown that when, for example, a CEO is a woman, the board tends to be more women and more diverse. So I think it's important to think about not only getting on boards, but leadership of committees and the board in and of itself. The other thing I'll say is that it's been shown that to make a difference in the thinking and the conversation, diversity needs to be about 3 people. So one, usually the single woman or the single African-American usually has a little bit more of a challenge than when there is more than a single individual in the room. So I think that's really important. And I think I can say a few more things, but I'll say one more thing. Boards, when they are the best boards, when they're managing diversity and thinking about this, they're also thinking about providing new directors, because oftentimes this might be the director who is diverse, their first board. So they're providing them with mentorship. So they're pairing them up with a more senior director to learn the ropes, learn the culture, and help them acclimatize and feel more comfortable, so that, the company and the board can get the benefit of their diversity and their thinking and their maybe different perspectives. So you don't just want to have these people, you don't just want to have anybody in the boardroom quiet. You want to have everybody contributing, and even if you are the minority, you need to feel comfortable so that you can, be your true self and share your true idea.
Absolutely. We don't just want warm bodies and filling up a seat, right? We want you to actually contribute in a meaningful way.
Let's
I'm going to, sorry.
Let's do Margarita, who just was elected to the board of the International Corporate Governance Society, and she's a scholar also on diversity, and she had the hand up.
Hi, I'm Marguerite, and I'm at the University of California, Irvine. And I've actually done a qualitative study on board diversity and looking at the selection process, as well as what happens once they're on the board. And so I talked to quite a few executive recruiters, both here and in Europe. And I kind of wanted to get your take on what you think happens in the interview process, because I know as an executive recruiter, you probably have sat in lots of these meetings where potential candidates are interviewed by board members. And I don't want to prejudice you what other recruiters have told me, but I kind of wanted to get your input on what you think the hurdles are that women face in these interviews in particular, and how, because obviously most of boards are male, so they're being interviewed predominantly by male members of the board, but also how this differs, and if you've noticed the interview process being different since 2020 versus prior to 2020, how the attitudes towards interviewing women in particular. I'm much more interested in the women issue because that's the issue in Europe, not so much the diversity issue in general. So just curious about how you perceive what's happened to the interview process in terms of, have you noticed that there's been a shift, or is it still the same as it was before 2020?
Sorry. I think, my perspective is going to be skewed because what I see are the boards and the interview process that's further evolved by virtue of the fact that they're using a recruiter and they're thinking about this strategically. What I would be concerned about is all of those boards out there that are winging it and not really thinking through strategically, how do we interview? What is our implicit bias? What are the things that we need to be mindful of? Because if they are working with the recruiter, by definition, we're having discussions about this and we're further evolved and we're thinking through, how to make the right decision and how to not let bias or other, experience influence us. So, I feel like I would say that interviews have changed in the last 10 years. I haven't, in my experience, seen fundamental differences in the last few years, but I'm only seeing a small, subset of the entire world of, bad interviews, let's say.
So what you're saying is you don't see much of a change in how women are being interviewed in the last couple of years as a result of all these initiatives to in the US in particular. So the observations that I had, which I'm sure you've had too, is that women have a much bigger hurdle to pass to get on a board than equivalent male. But the other observation that I'm kind of interested in, this is very particular to the US. In Europe, when people say diversity, they mean females. And in the US, when people say diversity on the board, they really mean minority, right? And that is the goal in a lot of boards, and especially I would assume since 2020, and the shortage of candidates. And so I was wondering if you've observed, given especially since 2020, the minority diversity candidates, have you seen more of a demand for minority diversity candidates and seen a change in the process as a result?
100%, like 110%. So I will say that about 60%, I think I did the numbers, of my board placements in the last 2 years have been ethnic, racial diversity. So, women as part of that, but, ethnic and racially diverse people on boards has been, I think, the number one request that I've got in the last couple of years. So obviously not just that, it's bring me a CFO who took a company public, who also happens to be diverse, bring me a real estate development executive who knows, multi whatever site retail, who also happens to be diverse. So it's, my clients are very, very specific and it's very targeted, but it's always like the overlay of diversity on top of that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We do have several more questions that we want to get through within the time remaining. So one of the questions really ties into our discussion here, and especially for boards that are winging it, as you so eloquently said. And so the question from Krista is asking, who are the real gatekeepers, decision makers on who intends to make this slate? Who are the ones that board candidates or executive search recruiters have to convince to let someone on the board in your experience?
So it's interesting because, who they should have to convince and who they do have to convince are two different things. I could talk a lot about this, but I'll say one of the interesting dilemmas that I've seen and problems in the whole process is that the CEO is a key gatekeeper. And if you think about it, that's like bad governance. The CEO should not be the gatekeeper deciding who's going to be overseeing him or her. But I will tell you that I don't think I've ever done a board search where the CEO is not part of the key decision-making group. And no board director who doesn't sort of get along with the CEO is going to go on the board. So this is a big flaw in the system, in my opinion. So it's improved. So when I started recruiting, 1997, we used to get engaged at Heidrick & Struggle, Spencer Stewart, any search firm would be engaged by the CEO. They would sign the contract, they would make the decision as to who the search firm was, etc. So 15 years ago, that changed, and now the search firms get engaged by the nominating and governance committee. So, so we've moved, we've evolved and we've improved the process. But again, the CEO must approve and, the director in order for them to get on board. So I think that is a problem. I don't know if that's the complete answer, but I think I'd like to leave that there because maybe one of you guys can figure out how to solve this problem, because I think, it's an issue.
Now, that's a really great observation, in part because we think about the nomination governance committee, right? They're comprised of independent directors. They're there to provide that unbiased decision-making. And yet, even though they have that formal responsibility, right, there's that informal element there with the CEO. So it's definitely something to keep in mind and realize that what's said on paper or what's specified in regulations doesn't actually necessarily translate directly to practice there. A few more questions from the chat. But before we go there, I would just want to check in with Ruth. Are there any questions live in your class?
Live? Come on. Maybe I'll ask one. Yeah, Enrique. I'll ask one on behalf of them. One of the chapters that you have, because we have a lot of participants from Latin America and Spain. So one of the chapters is about the Hispanic directors, and there's so little written about this. So I was wondering if you could give an example or just talk a little bit about that chapter for the audience, because we hear a lot about some other diversities, but not so much about the Hispanic diversity, which is, a great part of the population in the US.
Yeah, so I don't have the numbers in front of me, but basically compared to the Hispanic/Latino population in the US, Latino representation on boards is extremely low. So there's a wonderful organization called the Latino Corporate Directors Association in the United States that's working very, very hard to change this. They work every single day to provide information, but also to provide access to opportunities for qualified directors. And I broke out, when I was writing the book, I could have written it many different ways, but I wanted to break out the diversity into different groups, because oftentimes people talk about diversity as, just bring me diversity in general, like it's a monolithic group, and I think that is a little disrespectful and underappreciating the different types of diversity. It's not just bring me diversity. It has to be bring me, what kind of diversity do you need and for what reason? So I think, Latinos and, speak a different language, for example. So by virtue of the language in the United States, there's certain ways of looking at things that can be different versus African Americans who may have English as their mother tongue. So there's a lot of kind of, further detail and nuance that needs to be thought about, rather than just it's one big group of diverse people and, you know, the white men are on the other side. So so that's what I covered in my book. I talked about both the numbers that are different amongst different groups, and then the challenges that are different, and the attention that is paid that is different. You know, I also have a chapter on LGBTQ, because that is a type of diversity that a lot of people are talking about. You know, there's an organization just focused on bringing more out, you know, LGBTQ people, because there are probably many on boards that we don't know about, but really taking advantage of that group and what they might bring also to the discussion in the boardroom. So, you know, there's lots of ways to look at it. And I think when we talk about it, we just sort of do a big broad sweep, oh, diversity in the boardroom, and that's it. But it really is, you know, far more nuanced and detailed than that. So I don't know, Ruth, if that answers the question, but that's some of the thinking.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Shelley, back to you. Or you want me to ask another question? Do you have questions from the chat, or you want me to ask a question?
I do have a question in the chat, and it's related to this. So we've been talking about more diversity and talking about how there's a great need for that. What about the flip side? So Maria Agoro asked, what are some of the challenges to quote unquote too much diversity? What about the potential for conflict, and how do we reconcile that with our need for having diverse perspectives and voices on the board?
That's a high-class problem, right? That's very interesting. I haven't actually faced that situation. And I think because, you know, everybody, well, most people who go on a board are sufficiently kind of experienced to be kind of grown-ups in the room. So at least, you know, when I screen people, I always look for the ability, interpersonal skills, communication skills. And then when I reference them, you know, I always ask the same question: can this person push back and ask the tough questions without alienating the group or alienating the person providing the information? So I think, you know, too much diversity, I haven't seen problems with that. But I think part of it is, you know, the way boards decide, even whether they use a search firm or not, the way they decide on who joins them, by definition, it's usually a person who has some pretty good social skills. So generally, I haven't seen that as an issue, but, you know, it could be something that could be coming as boards get more, you know, more and more diverse.
That makes sense. So one of the things we talk about in academia is just like, we have different types of conflict. So you can have task conflict, you can have process conflict, and you have sort of interpersonal relationship conflict. And so conflict doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. Disagreeing about tasks can actually be beneficial, because then you open up room for debate, seek out new information, right, and be able to make a better decision as a result. But if you have sort of that interpersonal conflict where people just don't like each other, then that can be very detrimental to the group. So hearing you talk about how these boards or candidates joining generally have social skills, generally are pretty affable in that way, means that they're probably lower in terms of that interpersonal conflict, while still being able to raise those hard questions and make sure that sort of different perspectives are being heard. That allows for more task conflict there. I'm going to shift over to Ruth, because I know that she has several fantastic questions as well. So handing it over to you.
I have a follow-up question that I think might be interesting. Is when you assess board members, you are saying, you know, you're looking for the interpersonal skills, the communication skills. What else do you look at when you look at you're trying to, you know, decide whether you would propose somebody other than what's in the paper, right? Like, oh, this person knows a lot about IT, 20 years of experience, have also multinational experience, speak English and Spanish. But how can you tell about their like ethics, some of the other things? Like, what else are you looking for, you know, that people should prepare, or things that, yeah. So I think that would be really useful, because usually it's not there anywhere.
Yeah, so definitely, you know, ethics, well, a strong track record of success is, you know, first and foremost. So a track record of demonstrated success in their chosen career. And when I talk to people who want to sit on boards, I always say, you know, be the best you can in whatever you're doing. So if you're a CEO, be the best CEO. If you're a CIO, rise to the top, you know, practice your craft, learn it well, and be known as an expert. I think above and beyond that, though, the soft skills are a little more challenging. I always say search is an art and a science, and the resume is a science part. That's just what, the beginning of the conversation. So if they check the boxes, okay, they have the right skills on their resume, that's when the fun begins, because that's when you need to figure out who they are as a person and what kind of board member they're going to be. So I think ethics and morals, obviously very, very important. Communication skills, not only verbal, but written, very important.
Patricia, if I may interrupt, how do you check ethics and morals? Like past, kind of like, how do you check that? How do you find out about that?
I do a lot of what I call back channel referencing. So I will talk to a ton of people that have worked with this individual, not the references that they have provided, but the people that I find on my own who know them, to really dig in and try to, figure out who they are. And I was just telling my son this story because we were talking about, there's only so much checking you can do. But, the way I do it, I, will triangulate myself into like various conversations to really get at who this person really is. The good news about boards in general is that the people are usually senior level. They're usually visible. You usually, and I've been doing this for 25 years. I usually can find people who I know who know them. But I tell this story because it was happened to me probably about, 15, 18 years ago. I was working and I could, it's out there publicly. So I was working on a board search for Colgate, the toothpaste company. And we put on the former CFO of Dow Chemical. He was on the board at the time of the Royal Bank of Canada. He was the CFO of Dow. He was on some other board, I can't remember. But anyway, we put him on the board of Colgate. He was wonderful. He passed every test. And by the way, it was diversity. He was Latino, Hispanic. So he was a diverse individual, but highly, highly, highly accomplished. CFO of one of the biggest companies in the world. And we put him on the board of Colgate. He was a few years in, he was going to Toronto to attend the board meeting of the Royal Bank of Canada. And as he was entering the country, customs or immigration or whoever found him with cocaine. So he was importing cocaine. He was living in Florida. He was going to a board meeting. Maybe he was tired. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is, there's no way we could have known that. There's no way all of our checks and rechecks and everything that we did to, risk mitigate this search could have found out this situation. He was caught. He had to step down from all his boards and so on and so forth. And, it was a few years after we had done the search, but it's a kind of situation that I like to tell because no matter what you do, people are people, and they will surprise you and they will shock you. So, we do the best we can, but it's not, it's not a foolproof, ironclad, 100%, science.
Yeah. So what are the other, what are the other things that you look at? Sorry, I interrupted you. Prepare, make the best of your resume. You have them at the end of your book.
Yeah, I also, I want to see demonstrated commitment to the role. Do you have capacity to serve? Why are you doing this? What is your availability? Are you ready? I do a lot of work with activist investors, and this is one of the things they taught me is the director prepared to think like an owner, to really put skin in the game and really be committed to bettering the company and doing the right thing on behalf of all shareholders? So I like to dig deep into understand, what is your reason behind wanting to go on the board and your ability to commit? And I'll tell another very brief story. I was doing a board search years ago for a shoe company, a retailer, shoe stores all over the world. And when I interviewed the woman who was coming, to sit on this board, I said, so what did you think? Did you visit a store? And she said, no, I didn't have time. And for me, that was like a non-starter because, you're going to go on the board, you need to come to the interview and you need to understand from, if it's going to be the Colgate board, you need to use the toothpaste and figure out like what this company is about. So the fact that this woman didn't take the time and demonstrate the commitment, and people could argue, well, maybe she, whatever, she would have done it in the future. But for me, it's not what you say, it's what you do that gives all the clues that you need to understand people and whether they're going to make sense and do the right thing for my clients.
Yeah, fantastic. Shelley, back to you.
Yeah, so that answers Bill's first question of just what's your advice for someone who's interested in joining a corporate board, right? And not everyone gets the honor / privilege of being able to join that, but our discussion so far has given at least me, some faith that the processes are changing as long as you can demonstrate your competence, right? Be committed and be consistent in that, then you stand a much better chance. Granted, not all of us here are 90 old, like white men, so we still have a bit of an uphill battle, but at the very least, there's some tactics that we can use. Bill also asked a great second question, which is just, is there a company or industry that is really leading the pack in terms of board diversity? Any exemplars that we can point to and potentially learn from going forward?
Yes, so CPG companies in general are further along in that journey, and generally I'll say retail and fashion, although I will say this was very interesting to me. I don't know, for those of you who are here in the US, there's a store, the retail chain Saks Fifth Avenue, and this was very interesting to me. So 6 months ago or 8 months ago, they announced the appointment of James Harden, who is a basketball player, African-American, to the board. And I thought, this is great, adding diversity, nice, diversity of career is nice. And in the announcement, they said, and he joins the 6 other men on the board. And I'm like, hold on, Saks Fifth Avenue. So anybody who, who's gone to Saks knows that it's, mostly female. I don't know, my kids would call me a genderist if I said that, but in general, still today, mostly women are in, Saks Fifth Avenue. And the fact that they were announcing this and they didn't even think about the fact that there were no women on this board, for me was kind of shocking. So yeah, still goes on.
The fight continues, right?
The fight continues.
Fantastic. Okay, so we have about 3 minutes left, and a lot of other questions that are coming in. But I want to just turn the stage back to you, Patricia. If any closing remarks, any sort of key takeaways that, if we forgot everything else that we've talked about today, what's the lasting impression that we should remember?
Rome wasn't built in a day. So, we are moving in the right direction, albeit slow and painful. Things have definitely, and I feel like, I've seen it because of 2 decades. I've seen the change. I'll be happy when we no longer have to have these conversations and we take it for granted. You're not a man or woman, an African-American, you're just a person on a board. And you're there because you're qualified, and we have to, stop fighting this fight. But, at least we're moving in the right direction.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This was very insightful. No, I thank you for all the participants, for all the questions. And I think you got some new readers for your book, some new readers. Congratulations on the book. It's a wonderful book full of stories, like nice anecdotes for a corporate governance geek like all of us here. It's a very fun read. So thanks a lot for your webinar.
Thank you for having me.
So let's clap.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for joining. We'll be in touch with some future webinars as well. Take care.